How's it going, America? I'm Libby Emmons, and this is the Pod Millennial on the Just the News Podcast Network. You can find out more about our show at thepodmillennial.com.
This is the Pod Millennial with Libby Emmons.
On this episode of the Pod Millennial, we take a look at the COVID lockdown years in New York City, the hypocrisy, the school closures, and the long-term consequences for kids. I'm joined by Karol Markowicz on Leaving New York City and filmmaker Natalya Murakhver on the shocking impact of school closures documented in her film, 15 Days.
You're listening to the Pod Millennial with Libby Emmons on the Just the News Podcast Network.
I don't like being lied to. None of us do. But we all were for about 2 years straight, beginning in March 2020. That's when the coronavirus disease of 2019 came to America and everyone lost their minds. I was in Brooklyn. My son was in 4th grade. I'd just gotten a job with the Post Millennial after being a freelancer since 2018. As soon as the word came down that school was closed, I feared there'd be riots. And there were, exactly 10 weeks later. 2 weeks to stop the spread was a lie. Children are vectors of COVID was a lie. Racism is a bigger public health threat than COVID. Also a lie. Virtual school is just as good as real-life instruction was a lie. The laptop class stayed home, lounging on their couches in $400 yoga pants while having their gourmet food and lattes delivered by working-class deliverers in masks on e-bikes. Our leaders, people we elected, told us to stay home while they went out to parties. Gavin Newsom went to French Laundry. Bill de Blasio danced with his future ex-wife Shirlane McRae in Times Square on New Year's Eve while the rest of us stayed home and watched it on TV. One of the top COVID experts, the guy leading the war on it in New York City, telling us to stay home, enforcing vaccine mandates, keeping schools closed to placate Randy Weingarten and the teachers' union, shuttering churches against our 1A rights, was literally hosting drug-fueled sex parties in New York City hotel rooms, attending underground parties beneath banks on Wall Street, and feeling he was entitled to all of it because he just needed to blow off some steam. It was a stressful job. The man who told us to stay inside, watch our relatives die over Zoom, prohibited our children from getting an education, and got people fired from their jobs for not taking the experimental COVID vaccine, was sucking down ecstasy and having orgies with his wife and their friends. Teachers' unions kept schools closed, complaining about ventilation and kids breathing on them. Then the same teachers who refused to open schools took themselves on jet planes to vacation in the Caribbean. When they allowed our children to return to the public schools our tax dollars pay for, they handed them all Chromebooks and switched to the most bogus kind of instruction there is, virtual learning. And it's still in place. Kids now learn virtually in real-life classrooms. When COVID was over and kids returned to school, they took their Chromebooks with them. So much of so-called learning and education had moved online that it was just standard operating procedure to plunk kids down in front of screens and watch their eyes flicker with blue light all day. It's been a disaster. Everyone knows it's been a disaster, but the tech keeps being pushed anyway. In fact, Google is one of the pushers. During COVID, the company donated massive numbers of Chromebooks to schools. More were donated to accommodate remote learning during the California wildfires. Once the devices were in schools, curriculum shifted to online rather than on paper, and school districts signed years-long contracts with Google for devices and services. When school shut down on March 13th, I took my son to my mom's house at the Jersey Shore. We thought it would be a few weeks, but we stayed on until May. We didn't know yet we were being lied to. We thought maybe it would be the apocalypse, and I didn't want my mom to have to face the apocalypse alone. I imagined scenarios like those in Ice 9. I pictured a barren world where we'd have to learn to grow our own tomatoes, potatoes, and carrots. I told myself that if I had to skin a rabbit for food, I could do it. I looked at my son, realized it was up to me to make sure he got through this all right with continued development and new skills. We'd go out to the beach every day and play rough. He was 9. You need to play rough when you're a 9-year-old boy. I'd throw him into the soft sand and he'd howl with delight. There was no one on the beach. It was the off-season. It was COVID. And it definitely had the feel of the end times. By the time May rolled around, he was too big for me to play rough with anymore without me getting hurt. That's how much a 9-year-old boy can grow in just 3 months. In the mornings, right as the sun came up, I'd take my mom's bike out for a ride to the lighthouse. There was hardly anyone out at that time of day, runners, maybe another cyclist or two. When we'd pass, we each hugged the edge, keeping our distance the way the experts told us to. Finally, we headed back to Brooklyn in mid-May. One gorgeous Sunday, me, my son, and his dad took the ferry to the city and walked up from Pier 11. Stores had closed, restaurants were gone. There was more graffiti than before, but people were out. The city was healing. I could feel it. My favorite cafe was still there on McDougal Street. The bread was moldy on the sandwiches we ordered, but hey, at least they were still there. Washington Square Park was full of people, Tompkins too. We spent the whole afternoon into evening wandering. One lady yelled at me for not wearing a mask. I yelled back. The next day was May 25th. Central Park Karen made all the headlines. She got fired, her dog got repossessed, she was ostracized. Then it turned out the black guy, the bird watcher, was a frequent dog owner tormentor who weaponized his race against people. That night, George Floyd died in police custody in Minneapolis. By Wednesday, there were riots. Just a week or so later, the lies became fully transparent. We still weren't allowed to send our kids to school. Bougie laptoppers still sat on their couches eating delivery. But 10,000 protesters for Black trans lives were allowed, encouraged, to take to the streets outside the Brooklyn Museum and torch cop cars. Our leaders told us to stay home unless we were protesting. They said COVID didn't spread at protests. And it was in that moment that I realized it had all been a lie. I wish I'd known sooner. I wished I believed it wouldn't happen again, and it's that hope that leads me to keep telling these stories. But the lies keep coming, and the more obvious they are, the louder the liars chant them, trying to will you to believe them just to erase the dissonance in your own mind of knowing the truth and hearing only lies. So when they lie, make note of it. When they lie, call it out. When they lie, make sure you don't believe them. When they tell you lies are truth. It may be easier to go along to get along, but it isn't true. And knowing the truth and living in truth is way more important than letting the liars get off easy.
You're listening to The Pod Millennial with Libby Emmons on the Just the News Podcast Network.
This is Libby Emmons with The Pod Millennial. I'm here with Karol Markowicz, who's a columnist for the New York Post, Karol, and also a podcaster herself. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Libby. So nice to be on with you.
Thank you. So I really wanted to talk to you, and I was excited about this because I wanted to talk to you about our favorite ex-hometown, New York City, which is undergoing its own massive culture shock right now after they elected a commie and are now surprised that he's trying to raise their property taxes. It's like, well, he didn't want you to have your house anyway. Like, what did you think was going on? What's your take on what's going on in the city, and how are people reacting to it? Are you surprised at all?
So there was a three-way race, of course, and it was Curtis Lewa was the Republican, but then Andrew Cuomo was the independent, and I think it was just terrible candidates running against a terrible candidate. So I don't feel like the amount of people that voted for Mamdani wanted communism. They just knew they didn't want Curtis Lewa and Andrew Cuomo, which to me, fair enough. But a lot of people tried to vote against Mamdani, and I feel for those people because they did not want communism. They did not want, as we're having this conversation, or there's a raging debate on Twitter, on X, about whether somebody peeing on a subway is okay and something you just have to accept as part of city life. And I always say this, but like the New York that I grew up in, the answer was no.
The answer is no.
Someone peeing
Correct.
in your subway car. Like,
no, that's
it didn't
horrifying.
matter what party you were in, everybody agreed a homeless person peeing in the subway car was bad. And now we've gotten to where it's a debate. It's a conversation. Is it bad? Is it something we should just expect? Is it normal? And I don't know. That's always what has concerned me the most about New York over the last decade, is that this lack of sanity and this perspective of, and I lived in Park Slope before I moved to Florida, and that's one of the most far left neighborhoods in New York. And when somebody got mugged or something, the response would just be, don't report it to the police, or don't be racist in your description of the person who mugged you, or just this feeling of insanity where, wait a minute, I'm the one who got mugged. And David Sedaris had this great point about a dog biting him, and then all these people responding to him and saying, basically, like, you can't complain about this. The dog was, I think, a homeless person's dog. You really can't complain about this because complaining about it is like Trump coded.
Right.
And
Right.
he's like, but I got bit by a dog, and he's a liberal. He's definitely no Trumper, and he's saying like nobody gave him any sympathy for getting bit by a dog because that's supposed to be just kind of like expected and okay, and that's just part of living in New York now, and
It shouldn't be.
never
Yeah.
was before.
It
Yeah.
shouldn't be. When I was a kid in New York, my mom lived in New York City. I lived near Boston with my dad, but I would see my mom. I would come to the city school breaks, summers. The subways were often covered with graffiti, and it was pretty gross. And you'd walk through Times Square, and I remember distinctly the first time I saw something pornographic. It was on a black and white newspaper that blew onto my legs in Times Square, and I had to peel it off when I was like 8 years old.
my God.
And I was like, Mom, what is this? We knew not to take the gypsy cabs. The hookers were on 13th Street. Like, you had to watch it. There were definitely places in the city where you would not go. I remember very distinctly a woman was jogging at like 4 a.m. on the east side, and she got murdered. And we looked at it, and I said to my mom, why was she out there? What was she doing? And my mom was like, that's the right answer. Yes, do not go. And then when Giuliani was elected, greatest mayor the city's ever known, Rudy Giuliani. Yeah. So everything changed literally overnight. I would walk through Washington Square with my friends, and suddenly we weren't getting a million offers to buy drugs. There was like a big police trailer at the south side of the park, and you'd walk through and it was safe. And then by the time you had 8 years of Giuliani, 12 years of Bloomberg, you could walk home from Midtown Manhattan to Brooklyn drunk at 3 a.m. and nothing would happen. Nothing.
Right.
It was nothing. It felt like this paradise. It really did.
It was.
Yes.
It was a paradise. Like, I loved New York so much and felt so safe and secure there. People say to me, why didn't you move sooner? My answer is always because it was amazing. Even the first 4 years of Bill de Blasio, he kind of skated on their accomplishments, and he started chipping away at things, but it took a while. You couldn't undo 20 years of that amazing era overnight. And so we had this even lag time with the de Blasio administration where it didn't get bad that quickly, but then once it did, it was very hard to watch them undo, 20 years of great police work, 20 years of the city becoming safer and better and cleaner, somewhere you want it to be. And they decided that that was not what they wanted to have in New York City. And that was insanity to me.
Yeah, I think it's absolute madness. And a lot of it happened in COVID with, again, de Blasio. And one of the things I will never forget, and this was a huge moment of shifting in the culture of New York City, which, you could go to any, everything was sort of open and great. And there was great stuff at every level. People complained about Bloomberg was putting too much money into Manhattan, but all that money was spilling out. And no one remembers that, he built massive parks in all the outer boroughs. So at any price point in the city, whether you were a millionaire or a billionaire or one of the many middle class people making under 100,000, you could take your kid to the park and it was safe and great. You could go to mid-range restaurants and they were good. There was a Michelin star restaurant, very affordable, next to my grocery store in Bay Ridge. I mean, come on, what? Yeah, this is great.
It's what you want in a city, the safety and the security, but all the great experiences. It was just wonderful, and I remain angry that they broke my amazing city.
Me too.
Everybody had worked so hard to build up and to make it become great. And they did it in the name of equity while making everybody worse off.
Right. And the moment I wanted to mention was, and I'm sure you remember this as well, during COVID, they told everybody, New Year's Eve is canceled in Times Square, which as a New Yorker, you don't go anyway, but you watch it on TV and you watch it when you're hanging out, whatever.
Yep.
It's fun to have that event in the city, even if, you don't want to go to it yourself. But then they told everyone to go home. And I remember sitting up late making midnight brownies with my son, which is sort of like our New Year's thing now. And there was the mayor dancing with his wife in Times Square, empty, like a dictator, like some sort of Eastern European or Latin American dictator who just takes charge of everything. And if you leave your house, like you're going to get arrested. I mean, people are getting arrested for not masking on the ferry sitting outside. And that was just crazy. And how did that play for you? Because I know you moved out of the city before I did. And I found it shocking when you did move. I was like, she owns a home in Park Slope. Oh my goodness. How do you leave that?
Yeah, it was very hard. It was genuinely very hard. But I remember that moment so well also because it's the thing about communism is that membership has its privileges. The people at the top are always going to show you how good it could be if you are aligned with them. Like it's never, I always say this, but like when Hunter Biden was coming to the White House after all the accusations against him and all the things that he did bad and wrong, it was specifically to show you I can. That was the same thing that Bill de Blasio was doing. That was the same thing the BLM protesters were doing. It was allowed because they were at the top of the food chain in the communist system. And I agree with you. It seems so third world to me and so not what we're about at all. How dare you? How dare you take that moment for yourself when everybody else has to be at home? And that November, right before that happened, that New Year, Andrew Cuomo, again, the great savior of New York in the last election, had told everybody not to see their families. And of course, he then made plans to go see his family because that doesn't apply to him. Like, why would he not be able to see his family? He's Andrew Cuomo. You're just a schnook in Brooklyn.
Right.
It was all very hard to watch.
Yeah,
It was so hard.
Yeah. Now tell me about that.
No, so we, we're two immigrant kids who grew up in the boroughs. I grew up in Brooklyn, and my husband grew up in Queens. And I like to say I grew up in like real Brooklyn, like Flatbush, Bensonhurst, South Brooklyn.
That's where my grandparents grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it's still amazing in a lot of ways because they're able to kind of preserve normalcy at a time where, like, if you get mugged in Bensonhurst, they're not going to be like, well, what did you do wrong? Or don't describe the mugger, Like,
Yeah, unlikely.
It's going to be like, I'm sorry you got mugged. Still today.
Yes.
We always had this like dream of having a house in New York, and we had just renovated a townhouse in Park Slope, and we had spent 2 years doing it and moved it, and we suffered for it. I mean, like, look, when you're talking about renovating a townhouse in Park Slope, you've reached a level of being comfortable, but we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with our 3 kids. Like I'm talking 700 square feet for 2 years while we renovated it. And we did the things that you had to do to make it happen. And we moved in March 2020 and moved out January 22. And in that time period, we had taken a 6-month kind of test run of Florida. We lived in Palm Beach Gardens in Florida, an area I had never heard of, just because their schools were open and we could send our kids to the open schools. And we barely lived there. We designed and built our dream house and then sold it. So
Wow.
it worked out for the best, and we couldn't be happier. I drive around smiling. I don't know if it's like this for you, but this would have never happened had COVID not happened. I would have never realized how good life could be somewhere else and how much saner it could be and how much just a better life for my kids we could have. And I'm grateful and happy every single day that I get to live in Florida.
Yeah, I moved after you. I didn't have the money to do it for a while. I had to work on that. But I always wanted to own a home. I always wanted to own a home in New York City. My mom had an apartment.
Yeah.
She had this gorgeous apartment.
It's the dream.
Yeah, she had this great apartment on West 66th Street. And I remember she sold it when I was like 11 or 12 or something. And I said, Mom, please, I begged her. I was like, Mom, please don't sell the apartment. Please don't sell the apartment. Whatever you have to do. I know you're moving to Philadelphia, but please, I beg you, don't sell these. She sold the apartment. She has regretted it ever since because she's a sane person. It's like, how do you do that? But yeah, I moved to West Virginia, and I like to say it's the second most beautiful place I've ever seen after New York City. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's spectacular. And my son is happy. He likes it. He likes his friends. He likes the lifestyle. He likes that it's calm. It's like his thoughts
Right.
can spread out and he doesn't always feel like Harrison Bergeron, that Vonnegut story where it's like the smart person gets a ding just to like delete their thoughts. I think that was happening to him in New York City. It was like, wait, what was I thinking? What's going?
Calm is very important.
Yeah.
Something I really did not ever realize before. Back to the, urinating on the subway. I just thought that was life also. I knew it was bad, but I just thought that's what you had to like live like. And it turns out you don't.
No, you don't. You don't have to live with other crazy people's feces. Just there under De Blasio for the first time ever. I lived in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and under De Blasio was the first time ever walking to our park, which was Owl's Head Park. It's gorgeous. It's like on a bluff overlooking the Narrows, really beautiful. And I saw a man sitting on a stoop shooting up. And with my kid right there. And I was like, something's going wrong, something's going wrong here. But I was really surprised to find, because I lived in the Northeast my whole life, when it wasn't New York, it was Philadelphia, it was Boston, and so that's really the same. It's like one giant monoculture with slightly different accents and different sports team allegiances and, varying degrees of good seafood. So when I moved, I was surprised to find that a great deal of the ethos of leftist culture, leftist indoctrination has seeped in fully to a whole bunch of the rest of the country. There's definitely protests against Trump down in front of the town hall. And you're like, why are you guys idiots? Like, what are you doing? What are you protesting? There's people mad. Recently, there was like 650 illegal immigrants arrested in Jefferson County, West Virginia. People were angry about that. And I was like, no, this is good. I don't know if you guys have tried to take Uber around here, but like these guys can't drive. They probably shouldn't be here if they can't do that. But have you found that at all, that like that this culture has permeated the rest of the...
It's interesting because Florida is just in this moment of they have all the attention on Florida. It just seems like everybody's watching what we do next. It's just the last 4 years since we've moved here, I think Florida has just become, I mean, even before that, obviously with how DeSantis handled COVID, just this like beacon of conservative thought in America. And it was like, this is how you do it. Governor DeSantis had a whole freedom blueprint, and it's very much like people take pride here in being conservative. It's very different than where I've ever lived, obviously.
That's different from here too.
Yeah, that's surprising. And it's funny because I live in like a purple area, but I would say that people are far more open as conservatives than they are as liberals. And we do see occasionally the protests, but then it's like 12 people on a corner, with like F ICE posters, and it does happen. It's just, I don't know. There's also this like feeling in South Florida, all the immigrant communities are so right wing, like the Cubans, the Venezuelans, the ex-Soviets, they're all meshed together here talking about how bad leftism is, and you don't have the element of like, conservatism is for white people. It's like none of these people are white, or the ex-Soviets are, but they're largely Jewish, and it's not quite the same as other places, I would say, in that way. I think Floridians know that they have something special, and they're trying to guard it as best they can. What's happening is all of these tech firms are now, and financial firms are moving in, and people are definitely bracing for, okay, yes, the founder of the tech firm, the president of the finance firm, they might all be conservatives, they might all vote Republican, but are they bringing the whole team? Do they all understand that they're coming to something that is saving them from a possible wealth tax in California or something like that? Like, do they get it? Do they understand that they can't come here and vote for what they consider to be a more moderate Democrat? Like, they have to vote Republican to keep this the way it is and to maintain the sane, amazing, blossoming place that Florida is right now. People are unsure.
That's kind of what happened in Texas, right? I mean, I know you have Palantir moving into Florida, but now in Texas, they're really fighting hard to turn it blue. It used to be red. Now it's purple. And now you have James Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett and these other people really fighting to make a huge change in that state. And I think it's because so many people from California moved there and then just brought California with them without realizing that the reasons they were leaving were things that they could prevent. And it kind of reminds me of the whole thing with, you know, the leftists in the United States who keep advocating for immigration and like open borders and everything. And you're like, okay, you're telling me that all these people should come in because their countries are not good enough for them to be in. And then you're watching them try and remake the United States into the country that they left. And you're cool with this because you think America is bad, but at the same time, you don't want to send them back because somewhere else is worse. What are you doing? Or I saw this clip of this woman who was an American grad student, teacher's assistant type of, who said that she was, I guess she's non-binary or something. I don't really understand. But like she left the country because it was unsafe for trans people after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, is what she said, which makes no sense at all. And then she goes to Canada and she starts talking about, she puts out these TikToks and she's like, well, I can't get a job here because I'm not a citizen. And of course that makes sense. And you're like, what? Why does it only make sense for Canada?
Yeah.
Like it makes you can't access healthcare there, and she's complaining about that and saying it makes sense, but at the same time, that's what you've been advocating for in the United States. This disconnect that is so crazy, and I see it even here in West Virginia. There's like Antifa stickers up on the light posts and something. And you're like, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to like ruin everything?
It's strange.
Yeah, I find it very bizarre. And when I think about what's happening with, you know, the country, I worry about what's going to happen to the kids, especially since, and I know this is something that you look at too, the educational system has been completely hollowed out. I saw a report recently that was talking about how all of these schools ejected textbooks from their curriculums and they brought in Chromebooks. Has there been a difference for you in the educational systems between New York and Florida? What have you seen?
So it's interesting because I have 3 kids. The first 2 had no issue at all with the New York City public school system. They are both kind of like motivated self-starters. I would say both are very ahead and were always quite advanced. My youngest was in pre-K when COVID hit, and he was already 3rd child, a little bit behind maybe already when COVID hit. I would say we are still, he's in 4th grade now, undoing what was done. He would be in 5th grade if we stayed in New York, but the cutoffs are different in Florida. It's unbelievable to me that they destroyed this generation of kids and nobody's saying anything about it. Like, so again, we could, and we have, for our youngest son, got him a ton of tutoring and really focused on catching him up in a way that I don't think a lot of people can do. Not everybody can get a tutor for their child. And that was my thing during COVID. My kids all went to public school in New York. When the schools closed in New York, the private schools stayed open, but the public schools were closed. And I looked around at my leftist Park Slope neighbors like, are you guys going to say something about this? Or am I crazy here that the public schools are closed but the private schools are open and everybody's fine with that? But then I watched them just do whatever they had to do for their own kids, and they got them tutors, or they went to their beach house and went to school there, or they sent them to private schools or whatever. They moved somewhere, and it was like they didn't say a word for the people that I knew were going to be most affected by it, which was going to be the poor kids in New York City. And it's really hard for me to imagine what's going on there right now with the kids who are at my son's same year who didn't have the intensive help that we got him. And if you have a kid who's advanced, it's not going to be a problem. If you have a kid like on level, maybe they're okay. But if you have a kid who's already a little bit behind, I think those kids got fully left behind, and we see it in the test scores. It's just abysmal. I found the public schools in Florida to be excellent, especially in South Florida where I am. My kids go to private school now, and that's more of a decision based on security than on how good the schools are. I thought the public schools did a great job with both my advanced kids and my son who's a little behind.
The New York City schools, or you mean the current schools where
I
you're at
meant in
now?
Florida.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
in Florida they did. In New York, again, I didn't have a lot of opportunity because we left when my youngest son was in first grade,
Mm-hmm.
so it was January 2022. He was in the middle of first grade. But one of the things, like the way that they taught reading at the time, and it's changed since then, thankfully, but it was a memorization thing. He ended up memorizing like thousands of words the way that they look, but he wasn't able to read. And I was starting to advocate for him, and I was be like, he can't read. And they'd say, no, no, he can read. Watch, he can read. I'm like, he's guessing slash memorizing, and you
Mm-hmm.
guys are calling this reading. This is not how reading works. Reading is sounding out words. Like if you show him a word he's never seen before, he will not be able to read it. And that's crazy. But that's the way it was. And people kind of realized it. There was a New York Times podcast about the science of reading and the way that memorization thing wasn't working. But like they did it for so long. They did some fad reading, nonsense
Mm-hmm.
lessons for so long. How many kids were left behind with that? And it is scary. You asked like just how I think kids are doing. I'm afraid for the generation who largely didn't go to school during COVID and the ones who didn't get help. I don't know what they grow up to be, especially with AI like looming over all of us.
Yeah, it does. It's hard to look at it and not just put on your tinfoil hat and start
Yeah,
thinking. The idea is to dumb down everyone to make it so they don't even know how to learn for themselves, so that you can indoctrinate them into hating the country and marching around like little
yep.
soldiers, voting Democrat, and then destroying the United States because you've destroyed our children's brains first.
Right. I'm not gonna say somebody had a best-selling book about that 2 3 years ago, but Bethany Mandel and I wrote a book called Stolen Youth, and the
Mm-hmm.
concept really is they are coming for the kids, and it is an indoctrination effort, and it comes everywhere. It's not just in schools, it's at your pediatrician's office and through the
Mm-hmm.
media and at the library. But that was what we traced in Stolen Youth, and we had a chapter starting with COVID, and we also had a kind of a look back on history in totalitarian societies and the way they came for the kids. It was all out there. It was very obvious to us what they were doing. But yeah, you sound crazy when you say it, but we had a lot of evidence. So
Yeah, I remember that book. I think you guys are definitely correct about that. When you look at even what's being taught in schools, I mean, even just the removal of Shakespeare and the replacing with graphic
yeah.
novels, the removal of any kind of classics, or teaching history that is about grievance and
Mhm.
victimization instead of who won and what happened.
Right.
I find it very disturbing because people aren't going to know the real history of their country. And so they're not going to see any reason to save their country. They're not going to see any reason to keep their culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there, you still have these trends, because one thing that I remember from being a kid, and maybe this sounds weird, but I remember like there would be different little fashion trends. And I'd see them in New York in the summer, and then it would be like a year and a half before I saw them in Boston,
Right.
unlike the kids in Boston. And I always thought that was interesting. It's like, oh, that was trendy last year with my New York friends, and now it's trendy
Mhm.
here. And I think that plays out even more, the deeper you go into the country, because it just takes a while for the trends to get there. And the trends of telling white kids they're bad because of their race, or all of the restorative justice stuff, which
Mhm.
sort of makes kids do these weird apologies to each other that don't really mean anything, and no
Yeah.
punishment for kids who misbehave. The trans stuff, the gender stuff, that is
Mhm.
all in the curriculums. Even if New York changes and the Northeast changes and California changes, that stuff is embedded in these curriculums now, so
Yeah.
that like kids don't know how to read Shakespeare necessarily. They don't know
Or anything.
what the battles of the Civil War are. They don't read Greek. I can't tell you how many times in different educational settings my son's history class has been pre-Columbian. You're like, but how much Native American crap do you need to study? It's like there were Native Americans. They had a culture. Part of it was child sacrifice. And then we move on. Like, how much do
Right.
you need that? And there's so little of stuff about how America has been a force for good in the world, or even, just like these ideas that democracy is a force for good in the world, or that, Judeo-Christianity has been a substantial regardless of your religious beliefs, it's been a substantial social advancement globally. We get rid of human sacrifice this way. We know how to keep our food clean this way. All of these things that protect human beings and keep us flourishing. And now we're told that they are bad. And do you think that we can trend out of this? Or do you think we have a generation or even two of children that are lost to not?
It's so tough, especially the patriotism stuff, because when you're a teenager or in college, it's very cool to hate on America because we're so clearly the best. It's not even up for discussion or debate because it's not like we're just the best civilization currently, the greatest civilization in history. I mean,
all time.
Just it's such a fact that I think you get these kids who want to just be contrarian, and they say, no, America sucks, and look at these little details. I don't think that it's easy to counter that. We're also recording this right after the USA men's hockey team and the women's hockey team won the gold in the Olympics, and it's been such a rush watching them beat Canada, and it's such a patriotic moment. Jack Hughes, the guy who scored the game-winning goal, came out and said, I just love this country so much. And things like that do go a long way to influencing kids to say, I have it so good and I will appreciate it. I was born in the Soviet Union. My kids are told daily how good they have it and how lucky they are and how blessed we are and how my life could have gone so differently and they would have just not have existed and all of that. But kids whose families have been in America for generations and generations, I feel like should be still told, you have something incredible here and you should appreciate it.
Yeah, kids should be told to appreciate what we have here. It's funny, my son and I were talking the other day, and he said there's two ways that America can be portrayed in entertainment medium, right? You can have the United States as an underdog, or United States is, big, overarching and dominant. And he goes, and either way, it's awesome. It's like, yes, correct. Either way, it's going to do really well. Do you have advice for parents out there who saw their kid lose all of this time to COVID, all of this? Because I'm still struggling with this myself. And you look at it and you're like, is my kid ready to be a grown-up? I don't know. Does he know how to learn on his own? What can parents do to make sure their kids are prepared to be grown-ups in this country?
I know it's hard, but one of the main things is we have to get the kids to limit screen time. And I say this as somebody, I'm not one of those people who doesn't let their kids have a phone, doesn't let their kids have an iPad. They do. It's just not used excessively, basically. They don't use it outside the house. I mean, they're not like in a restaurant on their phones, like absolutely never.
Never, yeah.
They can use their iPads like on a plane, but not when we're all in a car together. That's what I call my music brainwashing time. That's the time I play you the best music and you learn. I think that parents have a real tough road. It's very, very hard to get your kids back on track after what they've been through. And I'm telling you, we're still doing it in our house. And if you have more than one kid who's behind, I think it gets obviously even harder. I'm not really sure what advice to offer other than don't ignore it. Don't think that your school is going to handle it. It's probably not. It's something that you have to do in the home. And it's a deprogramming, really. It's the way to show kids how to be and how to grow up and behave more than anything else. And again, I mentioned AI. All of that is coming at us so fast that I'm not really sure what these kids are going to end up doing. It's worrisome. Maybe it'll be a great opportunity, like a lot of people say. I'm hopeful, but it's going to change the trajectory of how the kids will see themselves or what professions they're going to go into. And it's just, I guess, just be there for your kids and let them know that what they're getting inside the home will always be more important than what they get outside.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you and find out what you're up to?
I'm at Karol, Karol, on X, and I host the Karol Markowicz Show and co-host the podcast Normally with Mary Catherine Ham on iHeart, but you can listen anywhere you get your podcasts.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby.
More of the Pod Millennial with Libby Emmons.
This is Libby Emmons. I'm with the Pod Millennial, and I'm here with Natalya Murakhver. She is the director of the film 15 Days. And Natalya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Libby.
So I checked out this film, 15 Days, and it was bringing back all of the worst memories from what I went through with education and COVID. I thought it was really well done. Congratulations on it. I can't wait for it to, hit streaming, which I know is coming up soon. What brought you to write this, to put this film together?
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed speaking to you over the last few years. I feel like COVID really brought out some of the best people that I know, and it's been like the silver lining of all of that hell that we went through. But I was an open schools parent in New York City. I was a Democrat with two kids who were in the public school system in elementary school, and initially I went ahead with all of the COVID, fear. I was very fearful as well, and was probably one of the first to wear a mask, and agreed that schools needed to be closed for just 15 days, 2 weeks, whatever they told us. But as time went on, it was pretty clear that the rest of the world was opening up, and that kids were being put first in countries like Denmark, all over Scandinavia, anywhere really in Europe. But in New York, and other blue progressive cities, places where I felt at home, kids were being completely shoved aside for what at the time it felt like, adult interest. And so I became very activated and joined one of the very first meetings of Keep NYC Schools Open, and started advocating for evidence-based policies in New York City. Tried to talk to electeds. Nobody wanted to have this conversation. Suddenly it dawned on us that it was becoming political, like our children's health and education, their suffering was being ignored. It was just kind of shocking. It was a huge awakening, and I vowed not to allow for these stories to be forgotten, because so many children, including mine, suffered and still continue to suffer because of the school closures that really crippled this nation's school system.
Yeah, I remember so distinctly. It was, what was it, like March 13th in New York City?
Yeah.
And I was walking my son to school. We got a phone call, and we were worried about COVID, right? I mean, we didn't know what was going on. It seemed like it could be the apocalypse. I remember saying, there's going to be riots. This is going to be a real problem. And there were riots about 10 weeks later. But I remember walking him to school, and I got a call from the nurse's office that said, a few kids from your son's class have lice. And I was like, okay, that's it. That's it. That's it. We turned around. I was like, you're not going to school today, because COVID is one thing, whatever that is. But now lice, like we're going to be quarantined with lice. This is more than I could handle, So we turned around and walked home. And that was the last day he ever spent in fourth grade. That was it. It was so horrific to see what they did to these kids. And for the first few weeks, there was no virtual school. They hadn't gotten that together. And this was District 20, Bay Ridge and Brooklyn. It's a good school district in terms of public schools in New York City. And it's not like the super rich districts, but it's a good school district there. And there was nothing. There was no accommodation. There was no concern for these kids. And my son is like this outgoing kid, and suddenly he was deprived of all social contact. It was absolutely horrifying, and it went on. It didn't just hit the end of fourth grade. Then once fifth grade was back, it was if somebody in the class was exposed to it was like what was the rule? It was so crazy. Yeah, there was the 2-case rule, but then there was also if someone in your home was exposed to COVID, you have to be out of school for 2 weeks. And I was just like, I'm lying. I'm going to lie. We're exposed to COVID constantly, and you don't get to know, because these kids aren't getting it. My son never got it. I got it.
Right.
I got it 4 times, and he never got it.
Right. Well, I mean, when kids get it, often they're asymptomatic, so you wouldn't even know. And that just shows, what impact it had on kids.
Well, we had to do the testing. We had to do the testing all the time, too. So, yeah.
We did too. I mean, sending your kid into a school and then having some random technologist or whatever stick a stick up their nose. Like, I can't believe we were compelled to do something like that to get our kindergartners into school buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was absolutely insane. And it felt like, as someone who, when I went to public school and I went to, all the different kinds of schools, but I went to public school through 8th grade. And I always had sort of a high trust in academia until pretty much right then. Higher education was already suspect for me by that point. But at that, once they told my kid he wasn't allowed to study, wasn't allowed to go to school.
Right.
And then,
Right.
oh, well, I don't think you do have the best interests of my kid at heart. And then when we did hit the virtual learning and suddenly he was getting 2-day special lessons in white privilege and systemic racism, I was absolutely
God.
horrified, and then to find that they're doing like Shakespeare, but the graphic novel version. What is even going on in these schools? So as much as it stole education, it also revealed to parents how little education was even going on. One thing that you have in your film that I thought was absolutely great was a real expose of these teachers' unions. And Randy Weingarten, who of course is a complete horror, like she shouldn't be in charge of anybody's children for any reason. What was going on with the teachers unions and their efforts essentially to keep schools closed?
I think the unions saw an opportunity to get an insane amount of money from the federal government, to use fear as a weapon, to close schools first to children, and later when kids were able to go back to school. I don't know if you were still in New York at the time, but parents couldn't go back into schools for a
That's
long
right.
time.
No, we couldn't.
So it's, at some point, I was wondering whether I had made a mistake in advocating for school reopenings in the first place.
Mhm.
Like, really, like on some level, looking back, I should have been like, you know what, keep them closed. You keep the schools. Like, we'll keep our kids,
Right.
it's just crazy. It's crazy because I think what they did was they extorted the federal government. I think we talk about this. President Trump and his first administration really tried to do the best he could. I think he really wanted to reopen schools. And sure enough, when he tweeted that schools should be open, the AAP and the teachers unions made sure that they didn't open because they had Trump derangement syndrome too.
Mhm.
But Trump trusted the wrong experts. He was being
Right.
misled by Fauci. He wasn't really hearing what Scott Atlas, who was a professor at Stanford University, an epidemiologist, and who was really kind of shouting from the rooftops back then, saying, look, schools are maybe different than other places in society only in the fact that they're safer because teachers are all young teachers, right? They're
Mhm.
all in their, 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s. It's a young profession. Teachers are not at risk. And for those who are, they can get special permission to stay home. But what the unions were doing, and I've also kind of had more realizations even after the film came out and our
Mhm.
work on it ended. I don't actually think that the teachers unions were looking out for the teachers' best interests. I think the teachers themselves, the educators are the union's product.
Hmm.
They are not their customers. And I think they were using them just like they were using the Black and brown community to say, look, here are, our members and we're looking out for their best interests and they don't feel safe going back to school. So we have to keep schools closed for them.
Mhm.
But it wasn't for the teachers. And research has been done on teachers who went back to school and taught in person versus those who stayed home in their yoga pants. And
Mhm.
the ones who went back, of course, had better mental health outcomes
Right.
because teachers go into teaching because they want to be with their students, not because they want to sit at home and stare into a screen. I don't know anybody who wants to do that. So, in my opinion, the teachers' unions just did this and extorted the federal government, used their own members and used the most, underprivileged communities and used them as shields for
Mhm.
their own craven agendas.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the kids in those underserved communities, not everybody had laptops, not everybody had tablets, not
Mhm.
everybody had access to like meals, right? You had parents who
Right.
were working because working class jobs, people in the laptop class were still getting their food deliveries from the people whose kids were stuck at home with no laptops half the time. You know what I mean? You
Right.
had these disparities, and it's like the disparities that the Democrats kept complaining about and saying they were trying to fix only grew under these policies. And there were some really horrific stories that came out during COVID. And you touch on things like this in your film in 15 Days. I remember distinctly there was a young man who, while on mute on Zoom, took his own life. He shot himself in the head in his own home, sitting there.
Wow.
There was
Oh my
another
God.
case where a little girl left the camera on when they went on break, and the entire class saw her getting sexually abused by her uncle. These are horrible situations and places where kids should not have been forced into, because of course you can look at these situations and think everyone's got to do what they can. Parents go to work to find someone to look after your kid. They can't stay home alone. And the schools just let us down. And when I think about how much they let us down, it wasn't just that they let kids down and parents down, but by depriving our American children of education, they're letting down the nation. These are the people who are supposed to be able to lead our country, and they've lost so much. What have you seen in terms of the catch up? Are there kids who are never going to catch up from this debilitating closure? I mean, what happens now? Where are kids now who were out of school and with messed up schooling?
Well, some of them never came back to school. I mean, Michael Pinckney, who is one of the fortunate people we interviewed in our film, who's now about to graduate from UCLA and was there on a sports scholarship, talks about the fact that the kids he competed with before COVID were not the same kids he competed with after COVID. They were gone. That's the worst case scenario. Our film is dedicated to Noah Sylvester, and I always try to take a moment and talk about him because he took his life last May. It's almost a year now. He was a twin. His mother is a psychiatrist in a Brooklyn hospital and really tried everything she possibly could to get him mental health support. This was somebody who was very well resourced and really kept crying out, saying, "Our kids are suffering. I see it in my own son." I filed a lawsuit against Bill de Blasio to reopen the schools back in 2021 because I saw the damage that was being taken out on kids. And this woman, Melanie Schwartz, was Noah Sylvester's mother, and she saw the debilitation from having the schools closed. And unfortunately, even with all her resources and sending him to therapy and special programs, he still took his life in May of 2025. So that is the worst case scenario. But what we've also seen beyond like horrific academic outcomes is this out of body experience for these kids, all of the trans ideology that really sprung up during this time. It really had an opportunity to grow and to take over. All these kids who couldn't find each other in person found these radical activist communities that told them they were special and loved and rainbows and unicorns. And parents lost their kids.
Right.
When I talk to these parents, a lot of them say that kind of happened during COVID. It was 2020 and Joey was on the computer all the time with the door closed. So I thought he was in class.
Right.
But that's not what Joey was. I think we'll be seeing the impacts of the school closures for this generation at the very least. I mean, it's been horrific.
There were also a number of educational policy changes that went through during COVID and because of COVID, like the incessant Chromebooks and tablets that are in removal of textbooks, the switch to all of these online portals like IXL and the other ones. I mean, there's like a half a dozen for them. The communication between school and parent got switched to online portals. There's like several of them. You need different passwords for each thing. The syllabi started being online, so you could hardly even see what your kids were studying. You really had to start looking over their shoulder on the Chromebook to see what was going on in school. What are some of these policy changes to education that are lasting even past COVID? I mean, we didn't go back to textbooks all of a sudden. You know, we didn't go back to math worksheets. They're still doing IXL. They sit there in class, which I find so horrifying. What are some of these educational policy changes, even in terms of government, that have stayed in place?
Well, I think one of the scariest one is sex ed, right? Back in like 4 years ago now, when my sixth grader, she's in 10th grade now, but she was then in sixth grade, started at a middle school, a public middle school on the Upper West Side. On the very first day of sixth grade, the class was asked what their pronouns were.
Oh, gosh.
And That's 4 years ago, right? So it's 2026 now. So I was 22.
Mm-hmm.
And it got worse from there, right? I mean, these sixth graders, they're 11 years old
Right.
and they're in the schools and they're being asked what their pronouns are. Can you imagine? I mean, I'm 54. Like, I think if somebody had asked me that question at 11, I wouldn't even know how to answer that. I'd be like, what's pronouns?
Right. No, exactly.
But as the 80s. From there, it went on to seventh grade, where their sex ed or their health ed teacher was teaching them that they were AFABs and AMABs. Have you heard those terms before?
Yes, this is the assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That was 3 years ago now. She
Mm-hmm.
came home and said, "Why am I an AFAB?" And I was like, "What?"
Right. It's like, you're
Um,
not. You're my daughter. Like,
I mean, there's no objective truth, right? Like they're
mm-hmm.
teaching these kids that everything is relative. And the health ed curriculum, which now starts very, very early, where they're teaching the second graders about sexual abuse and showing them videos and sexualizing them so early, and then forcing these very controversial books like the gender wheel or whatever, gender unicorn images into these children's classrooms and having these conversations and putting ideas into their heads. And if they told them they were cars, they'd probably believe it too.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably, in my opinion, and beyond academics, and we know the academics are abysmal, but what they're not doing is teaching them their times tables, but what they are teaching them is that there is no objective reality and that
Right.
the body they were born with may not have been the right body. So what are they supposed to do? I mean, these are irreversible damages. My now sixth grader, who was in kindergarten at the
Mm-hmm.
time, by first grade, she had a child in her classroom who was dressed and presenting as a girl, but actually was a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And it got the kids so confused. They didn't really understand. They knew that they thought this child was a girl, but the way the child interacted with other girls was very boyish.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of really messed with their heads. I remember one of the little girls that my daughter was in school with complained to her mother and said, "Why, when I have my friend over and I hand her a Barbie, she bashes the doll? Like she seems like one of the boys in the class, but she's supposed to be a girl." And it's created these confusions that is not a normal part of growing up. And then the other thing that I'm deeply concerned about on this level is, if you remember, the messaging our children were getting during COVID was, "Don't kill grandma, don't go near grandma,
Right.
you're going to be responsible." But grandparents, the elderly, were the repository of the ancestral wisdom, right? They would have been the ones who would have said, "Hey, listen, you may hate your breasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going through puberty. I hated them too. You get over it. You can be a tomboy, but at some point you're going to like want to wear a sexy black dress and go to a party."
Right.
But they've created this incredible divide between the generations. It breaks the continuum, and these kids are stuck in acontextual times.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things that really worry me. I've seen a real like accentuation since COVID, and it's our job to reverse it.
Mm-hmm. How is that possible? I mean, how can we do that?
The most important thing that we have to remember is that the First Amendment is our friend. We
Mm-hmm.
need to talk to everywhere we possibly can. And at times it's uncomfortable, but I think if enough of us speak out and don't live under the cloak of secrecy, "Oh, I voted for Trump, I can't tell anyone," tell everyone.
Right.
Right? You'd be surprised who else agrees with you. I was on a bus stop yesterday here in New York City, and this woman started talking to me and complaining about the state of New York City. Well, we know New York is going down the, tube because, we have Mamdani, but even before that, things weren't exactly great. And then she started bad mouthing Trump. And I looked at her and I said, "Guess what? I voted for him." And
Mm-hmm.
she was shocked.
She was
She was
surprised.
shocked, but shocked.
Wow.
Shocked. Her mouth was hanging open. "What?" Yeah, I said, "And you know what?" And I said, "I think he's the greatest president we've ever had." Her mouth is on the ground. She doesn't even know what to say. But we proceeded to have a civil conversation about it. And I wasn't rude to her. I didn't insult her. I didn't call her names. I
Mm-hmm.
just got her to question whether she should be making assumptions about where people around her stand. Because I think if everybody stays quiet and everybody stays in a silo, we have no hope of changing things. But we can speak out and we can be respectful and we can have dialogues. I think that to me is probably the most powerful thing we can do.
I certainly hope so. When you talk to people who are progressive, there is this understanding from their perspective that you agree with everything that they say. And it can be sort of overwhelming, and you don't even know where to start. I mean, you say things like, well, we shouldn't have been masking during COVID. We shouldn't have forced children to get experimental vaccines. We shouldn't have done any of these things, you know? Very like when they started pushing the vaccines on children, I took the COVID shot because my mother insisted that I take it. And I try to please my mother. And then when they were like, you know, all the kids under 12 have to take it. And my mom was like, so when are you going to get the grandchild the vaccine? And I was like, oh no, I'm not actually doing that. You know, you can force your kid to get it, but you can't force my kid to get it.
Right.
Then we couldn't go to dinner. It's like the next thing I know, I was in Bay Ridge. The next thing I know, I'm just driving to Jersey all the time just to get a burger.
I remember that.
Yeah, what are you supposed to do? You know, pay $17 to cross the Goethel.
And you know what was even more horrific than those mandates is that people were so eager to comply, like people who had minuscule amounts of power. We were at a children's gymnastic and dance studio here on the Upper West Side, and we'd been there for years. And the minute they announced the COVID shot mandate for 6 and up, my 6-year-old, she was 6 or 7 at the time, was banned from the gymnastics studio.
Oh, that's
and I was
so
just like, are you
messed
going
up.
to even give us? Are you even going to give us a grace period? I mean, I was never planning to vaccinate them, but for COVID, I was like, wait, so like all these years of camaraderie and patronage, all of that has gone out the way. The most important thing is that you follow these city Department of Health rules. And
Right.
now, you know, I got radio silence. They were not going to back down. They were so eager to enforce these rules. And that I thought was the most disturbing thing.
There's also, since COVID and since since these restrictions were lifted and everything else, there's been a real interest from Democrats and the Republicans who complied with this to sweep it under the rug, to just pretend that it never happened. And films like yours, I think, are important because they show us what did happen. This is a little piece of our history that we can't forget because Democrats used this as it was a crisis-opportunity. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And so many different things were changed. Nancy Pelosi went on the whole country should do mail-in voting and early voting. Our entire voting systems have changed because of COVID. The educational systems changed because of COVID. And what is it that you want people to take from this film? What do you want them to keep in mind as we just, move forward as Americans?
Our civil liberties are paramount. We must preserve them at all costs. I am a refugee from the Soviet Union. I came here in 1977 as a 6-year-old, and my parents cherished and continue to cherish their freedoms here, from freedom of speech to the Constitution. And I think that these forces that did this to us are continuing to destroy this republic. We're about to hit 250 years. We need to preserve the republic. If we can't keep this republic, what comes next? I mean, it's imperfect, but this is as good as it gets. And I'd like people to just be a little bit more savvy about the propaganda that they see in the media. I think we have a really great section in the film where Martin Gurry, who's a former CIA analyst and a writer, talks about how the messaging was so similar from many different outlets. And we're seeing that still, right? How the language is similar. So we need to be media literate. We need to be very savvy very quickly and develop critical thinking skills and really be able to read between the lines and triangulate in where we get our news sources from too.
Right. There was a great montage that you have in 15 Days where it's just everybody saying abundance of caution.
Yep.
And then you're like, oh yeah, they all said it all at once.
Yep.
You could interchange any of these things, for the other, any of these people for the other.
They're still doing that.
They are still doing it.
Doing that with ICE. They're doing
it
with
things everything else. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And you kind of wonder, like, who sends out these memos? Where do they get
Yeah.
this language? You can look at some of it. The AP changes their style guide, and then everybody falls in line with some things. So I think that's part of it, is these bigger groups just pass the word on, or the ACLU.
Yeah, the activist groups send their style guides. Activist groups train the New York Times. They train the Washington Post. That's why you have all of the trans language. Like, that's not natural. That's not from the dictionary. That's trans activist training. So we need to become savvy to this language and see through it.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much, Natalya, for joining us. I'm so glad that I can share this film with everybody. Where can people go to watch and find 15 Days?
They can go to 15daysfilm.com, and it's 15daysfilm.com.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much, Libby. Great to talk to you.
You too.
You've been listening to the Pod Millennial. Join Libby Emmons every week for the latest in politics, culture, and the stories shaping our world.
Thanks for spending time with us on the Pod Millennial. We'll be back next Tuesday with more conversations about the culture shaping America. Subscribe, share the show, tell a friend, and follow along on social media. Visit thepodmillennial.com to find all our episodes. See you next week.